Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today you're going to be a mole competing in the annual Mountain Maker tournament. You'll be navigating underground, leaving molehills in your path. Mountains Out of Molehills is a game about planning and predicting while trying to be the mole with the most control. It's for 2 to 4 players, takes 45 to 60 minutes to play, for ages 9 and up, and published by The Op. Now today, we'll be doing a rule school. Well, I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now I've placed timestamps below me in the description of this video, just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Well, let's get started. In Mountains Out of Molehills, you're each moles moving around underground. And as you move underground, you're going to be building molehills above you, always from the bottom up, directly above you. And you're trying to score points by controlling molehills by having the piece on the bottom of each of the hills. And the higher the molehill, the more points you'll get. And you'll be drafting cards that help you move and or turn, or even playing a rock, which can mess with everyone's plans. Because you'll be playing these cards in order at the beginning of the round and watching it play out. So let's see if you can outplan, outthink, and outbuild and control the most molehills in Mountains Out of Molehills. To set up, first you're going to remove all the components from inside of the game box and set them all off to the side on the table. This will be important for a step in just a moment. Now each player is going to select a mole from one of the 4 that are here. Now each of these have a corresponding base, like this is the green one, this is the gray one, this is sort of the sand colored one, and this one is sort of this clay color. Now these are going to go on these bases, but the first time you play, each of these have a clear protective coating on one side of these acrylic standees, and you're going to want to take those off first before you put them in the bases. So right here I've shown what it looks like when it first starts to come off. You'll just need to use your fingernail to get it started. And once you have it started, you'll just simply peel it off and you can just throw these little pieces here in the trash. You'll also do that to one side of all of the acrylic bases as well. Then you'll place each of the moles on their corresponding bases, and each player will select one. If you're playing with less than 4 players, the moles that are not being used this game can be placed back in the box. Each player is also going to get molehill pieces of their color, and they'll place them in front of them. They don't have to be arranged in any special way. I've kind of stacked them, but you don't have to do that. They could be in any arrangement you like. Again, the mole pieces from the moles that are not used this game can be placed back in the box. Next, you're going to find the King of the Hill tokens. Now they're numbered 1 through 4. Now you're going to use numbers 1 through the amount of players you're playing with. So if you're playing with 2 players, you'll be using numbers 1 and 2. 3 players, 1, 2, and 3. 4 players, you'll be using all 4 of these. So if you're playing with less than 4 players, place the numbers back in the box that aren't going to be used. Then shuffle the remaining numbers together and randomly deal them out to each player. These will be placed with each player in front of them, as these will be used for turn order for the first round of the game. Now you'll see why we were telling you to take everything out of the box, and again, if you're playing with less than 4 players, you'd also have some other components put back in under here and here. Because what you're going to do is you're going to create the board, and it uses the box for this. You're going to take the underground board, which is the one that looks like dirt, and you're literally going to lay it right into the box like this. Now notice that this board has a grid that says for 3 or 4 players. If you're playing with 2 players, you'll use the other side, which is this smaller grid. Next, get ready to place the support pieces, because these are going to help hold the above ground board. Now notice that the bottoms of these have an open spot here, but the tops have sort of a little bit of a ledge. You want to make sure that when you place these on the board, that these are on the top and they're sticking out. Meaning you're going to place them right into the edges in between the board and the end of the box. And again, the top, this is the part that's sticking out, is the ledge. Each one of these should have the ledge at the top here to support the above ground board. Now it's going to sit right on top snugly like that. Now make sure that you're using the side for your player count. Again, it says players 3 and 4. The other side is the smaller grid if you're using 2 players. And remember, it's in the same orientation as we showed you here, shows you the 3 and 4 players, but also A1 is in the upper left, just like in the underground board. Then, starting with the player that has the number 1 King of the Hill token and going in player order based upon those token numbers, Each player is going to take their mole and place it in one of the corner spots of the board, and they can face their mole in either direction, either in this case looking this way or looking in the other direction. This one, for example, is in the corner where it says F6. Then that player is going to place a molehill in that same exact spot directly above them, above ground, because that's where the moles are building the molehills. So in this case, in F6 on the above ground board, they're placing one of their molehills. So this is what it might look like after all 4 players have done this. Now don't worry too much about the strategy here. It's not going to have huge implications on your end game score. So just place them in one of the corners and face it in one of the cardinal directions. Remember, you can't face them diagonal. Now keep in mind, if you're playing a 3-player game, that you're not using the 6x6 grid, you're using a 5x5 grid. And that grid ends right here. This is the lower right corner of the 3-player board as indicated here. And what this basically means is that you'll never be using the row that's 6, and you'll never be using the column that's F in a 3-player game. So those are the 2 moles that are closest to the bottom of the board in a 3-player game in their respective corners. Now off to the side, you're going to shuffle the movement cards, and you're going to place the rock and the rock die. You'll also place the score pad off to the side. You'll be using this at the end of each of the 6 rounds. The object of the game is to have the most points at the end, and you're going to be gaining points by controlling different molehills on this above ground board, and we'll tell you more about how this works in just a moment. The game is played over 6 rounds, and each round consists of 3 parts. The first part of each round is the card drafting. From the movement card deck that you've already shuffled, you're going to place a certain amount of cards face up, depending on the amount of players. For each player, you're going to lay out 5 face-up cards. So here in a 4-player game, there's going to be 20 total cards. It's always 5 cards times the amount of players. Then, starting with the first player, and then going in order of those token numbers, each player will draft one of these cards into their hand, and you'll continue doing this until all players have drafted 4 cards. Then any remaining cards will be discarded, place these in a discard pile off to the side next to the draw deck of the movement cards. Then you're going to go to the second part of the round, which is planning and movement. Now in the planning section, you're going to have 4 cards. These are normally in your hand because when you take these cards, they're secret. They're in your hand, you're not showing anybody. They obviously saw what you took, but you don't want them to always know what you have. So these cards are typically in your hand, secret from other players. And what you're going to do is you're going to essentially program in what order these are going to happen. Now I'm going to go over what all these movement cards do in just a moment, but let's show you how you typically put these cards down once you know which order you want to do them in. Now once you figure it out, I like to put them left to right. Like this is going to be my first move, this is going to be my second move, this is going to be my third move, this is going to be my 4th move, and I have them left to right because what's going to happen is the card on top is going to happen first and then all the way down. So I have them left to right, but I also have them splayed in a normal way that you hold cards. But once I have them like this, I simply just close them and place them down, and I know they're in the right order. If you don't want to do it that way, you can just simply say, okay, I know which ones I'm going to do last, and you put that one down, second to last, third to last, and basically the first card. Whatever way worked for you, just know that the top card's going to be first. They're all going to go in order from top to bottom. They're going to be face down, and once you do that and you're ready, you take your King of the Hill token and you place it on top to show everyone you're done with your planning. And once you've done that, you cannot rearrange any cards after this step. And once everyone's done that, you're going to go to the movement step of the planning and movement part of the round. Again, keeping in mind that the movement cards cannot be changed or looked at to remember what's coming. Now the way this works is the player with the number 1 token is going to flip the number 1 card, the top card, and they're going to resolve this. Then the player with the 2 tokens is going to do the same thing, and 3 and 4, assuming you have that many players. When it comes back and all the players have done their first card, the first player is then going to do the second card and resolve it, and so on and so forth. You'll keep going in order of these tokens, each time flipping 1 card when it's your turn and resolving the card. So everyone is going to do 4 actions in the order that they programmed them. So let's show you what all these actions do. Now some of the cards have just straight movements on them. We have a move of 1, a move of 2, and a move of 3. All of these work the same way, of course moving a different amount of spots in the straight line. So if you remember, we had played the actual +3 there for our first card, so let's show you this for the example. So here we are, we're facing this way. We're gonna move 3 in a straight line. Now, you can see which way they're facing. It's always the way that their nose is facing. And so we have 1, 2, 3. Now, anytime you move into a new space, you're going to place one of your molehills on the above board. So it would have looked just like this. However, let's say it looked like this right before we moved, and we've just moved and we need to place our molehills on those 3 spots. Since the moles are building from underground up, the ones that you place always go on the bottom of any other molehills that are already there, so it would look like that. Now let's talk a little bit about moving. I was moving in a straight line 3. Let's say this is where I started. Now in this case, I'm gonna move 1, 2, and I'm supposed to move 3. If you ever hit the edge of the board, you forfeit the rest of your movements. Also, if you were to move forward, let's say I had a movement forward of 3 again, but there's a mole right there. I would go 1, and then I would stop and forfeit the rest of the movements from that card because you just bump into the mole and you just stand still there. Now let's talk about the height of the molehills. Each round, there is a different max height. It starts at 2, then for the next 2 rounds it's 3, the next 2 rounds it's 4, then it's 5. This is how many molehills are in each column. So right now in round 1, the max height is 2. So the ones that we've placed already are at a max height of 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. But let's say we were here and I had a movement 1. Now remember, you only put molehills in spots that you move into or through on your turn. So again, always looking at the grid. This is C5 and C5 is right here. You can usually tell by looking, but you can always double check by looking at the grid. And now we've built to a height of 3, again, always going bottom up, and that's higher than the max height for this round. So in this case, it is going to topple. Now when it topples, the bottom piece always stays, but everything above it topples over. And you get to choose, the player who basically caused the topple gets to choose in which single direction the topple is going to move. And you can never topple in a diagonal manner, always just up, down, left, or right. So let's say we wanted it to topple in this direction. Now just like in real life, if this were to topple, then the lowest one always is going to stay, but if it was toppling, the next one up from the bottom would go here, and the one higher up would go there. So in this case, this piece is going to go on top of this piece, and this piece is going to fall here. Think of it following, but with the bottom spot always staying, and that just helps you visualize how the topple will happen. And so now it would look like this, and we have another max height. Let's show you another example. Let's say we wanted it to topple in this direction. So let's show you what that would look like right after it toppled. So now, again, it toppled in that direction as shown before, but we now have another one that's higher than the max height. And so the player that caused that to happen would now have to topple this one in any of those 4 directions. And remember, anytime multiple topples are triggered, you always completely resolve the first topple first, and then resolve any of the other triggered topples in any order. Now let's say this one was gonna topple this way to the left. Now this is gonna stay, the gray is gonna go on top of here, and the green is actually gonna topple over the edge and go out of the game. Now any of those pieces that go off the edge go back to their prospective owners, but again, now we have another topple to resolve, and you can see how things escalate with the toppling. So maybe we're the green player, let's have it topple towards us, the yellow piece will go here, and the gray will fall off and go back to that player. And that's how you resolve topples. Now remember, each player in turn order from the tokens are playing 1 card at a time from the top of their pile in that order, going around player to player. So let's show you what some of these other cards do. Now so far we've only shown you cards that move you in a straight line a number of spots. Well here I'm just going to show you just turns. This is a complete about face or a U-turn. This is turn left or turn right. And so if you're doing the U-turn, you would just simply turn it directly to the other direction. Always just looking at the nose, staying on the same space. If you're turning left or right, you simply, in that case, either turn left or turn right if that's where you are. Now, very important, you never build a molehill in the above ground when you're turning, only when you're moving into a new spot. Now, these 2 cards allow you to turn and move. This one allows you to turn left and move 1, turn right and move 1. Now, when you have one of these cards that has both options on there, you'll do both, but you get to say the order. So this one, you could turn left, then move 1, or move 1, then turn left. So yeah, if this was us, we could move 1, putting a new molehill just above us here, then turning left, just like that. Or we started here, we could have turned left, then move 1, putting the molehill above that spot instead. Now let's talk about placing or relocating the rock. Now if the rock hasn't yet been placed in the game, you will place it from off to the side onto the board on any empty spot like this. Then you're going to roll the rock die and then place it right on top of the rock. So now it shows what's going to happen if somebody moves into the rock. So for example, if this player needed to move into the rock, instead it will do what this says, like this says, do an about face or a U-turn there. So let's say I had a movement of forward 3. I would go 1, and instead of moving 2, I do this, which is 2, and then I'm going to move back 3 for the third spot. So it simply replaces the movement that was there with whatever that is, and any other movement that you still have is carried out as normal. Now the rock will stay here until somebody plays another rock card and moves it to another empty spot and rolls the die. Now the last card I'm going to show you is the mole. And in this case, the mole remains in its current space, but it's considered to peak above ground, and this causes the mountain above to topple, regardless of its height. So for example, if we played the mole card we were here, it peaks above, and it makes this one topple, following all the topple rules that I've already went over. So once all players in the token order has gone through in order and played all 4 of their cards, one at a time, you're going to go to the third part of the round, which is the scoring. Now players will score points for every mountain that they control. And you know if you control it because the moles look upward, and whoever is on the bottom controls that molehill, and you'll get an equal amount of points for the amount of pieces in that mountain regardless of the colors. For example, the clay color, they're going to get 1, 2. They control this because they're on the bottom, and there's 2 pieces. So that's 2 points for the clay color. And then another 1 here, where the yellow player is going to just get 1 point here. The green player is going to get 2 points here, 1, 2. Another 2 here, 1, 2. And the gray player is going to get 1 here and 1, 2 there. Now, very important that you do not remove any molehills while scoring. All the molehills will continue to grow throughout the game, and you're going to notate all of these scores on the score pad. Now, if it's not the end of the game, which is the end of the 6th round, you'll go on to King of the Hill, and where players are going to select turn order for the next round. Now, the player with the most molehill pieces on the top of the mountain gets to choose their turn order first, followed by the player with the second most, and so on. So in this case, it would be green because there's 1, 2, 3 greens. Now normally there'd be more pieces from the other players that aren't green, but I made this example so we could see how things differently score depending on where they're at and the different amounts and more of one colors and things like that. And there's some strategy as to which one you pick, because if you pick first, well, you get the first choice when you're drafting the cards for next round that will be your movement cards. But going last can be advantageous too, because you're the last one to possibly play, and you're going to maybe make a molehill and get control at the very end of the round. Now, if there was a tie as to who had the most molehills on top, you look at the previous turn order from last round and you keep them the same in that regard relative to each other. So if one player was 2 last round and one player was 4 and they're both tied, this player would pick before this player. Then all players are going to discard all their used movement cards into the discard pile. So assuming the game isn't over, you would go through those 3 parts again: card drafting, planning a movement, and scoring, just as I've detailed earlier. Now the game will end at the end of the 6th round. Players add their scores from all the rounds together, and the one who has the most is the winner. If it's a tie, the player who has the most mountains with 5 molehills in their control at the end is the winner. For example, here is a mountain of 5. It's controlled by yellow. Whoever has the most of them controlled with a stack of 5 is the winner. If there's still a tie, then you compare the mountains of 4, then 3, then 2, then 1 until the tie is broken. And in the rare case that the tied players have the same number of mountains and all the heights, those players share the victory. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into mountains out of molehills faster than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you have further questions about the rules, I've placed a link below me in the description of this video. That's really the best place to ask them, since I'll be notified, but so will the op.